Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price.
I'm Scott Wilbur.
And I'm Eric. And today we have a very special treat for you guys. So, you might have been wondering, what was that long podcast break about that Jim took? And I say Jim because Jim is the primary strategist of Smash Up. So, you're probably wondering, Jim has done all these strategy videos. What would it like to play a game that he designed? What would it be like to play a game that was developed by someone who has wrote their master's thesis on artificial intelligence on Catan? You're probably wondering, who has a master's degree in AI? So, let me be the first one to announce that Jim Price has made his own game.
That's correct.
This thing is phenomenal.
Oh, it's absolutely great.
Right, so let's go ahead and jump into introduction to Scott real quick. I know we gave a great teaser. Jim has a game, and then we're just gonna be like, let's put that on hold. Let's talk about Scott for a second. Hi, Scott. How you doing?
Hey,
Welcome
Eric.
to the channel.
Thank you. Great to be on the channel. Just a little bit about myself. I've been in gaming for, as long as I can remember, probably about 17, 18 years now. I started as a writer for a small startup company for a tabletop role-playing game. I've done playtesting for a bunch of major manufacturers, as well as a bunch of indie games. A lot of them here local to the Triangle in North Carolina. I've worked with Unpub and the indie development groups here, and a number of games that are still under NDA or that I really can't speak to too much for release for major companies out there as well. So when I was brought in to be a consultant on Jim's new game, it was just a really fun thing to be able to go in to do a deep dive and to find all the little nitty-bitty things that could be tweaked or changed or modified to bring this to be like a really good, high-class, high-caliber game to bring to everybody else. And I can't wait for people to see it.
Excellent. So let's actually talk about the game.
Right, so the name of the game is Birthright, subtitled War of the Rivals. Now, Birthright is a game that I've been working on for over 3 years. It actually predates Crank It Up. I've wanted to be a game designer my entire life. I've been working on things. I actually had the luxury of meeting Paul Peterson in first, even before Crank It Up, in person, before Crank It Up even existed. And he told the group that you need to design 1,000 bad ideas before you come up with one good one. And I've had about 1,000 bad ideas, and I feel like we finally found the good one. And that's exciting because we're going to talk to you about it today.
Okay, so Scott, if you could give a quick, brief what's your snippet about Birthright?
So Birthright is a fantastic heads-up strategic card game that has a lot of fantastic modularity, replayability, and just overall fun tactile feel to it, that it's something that I look forward to playing quite a few times more.
Okay, so one of the things I love about Birthright is the fact that this game is optimized for two-player game. It's a perfect two-player game because it's not designed for 3 players. It's not designed for 4 players, and God forbid you throw 5 players in there. So this is it's so well balanced that 2 players, it's the perfect count. And you can make great games that are great for 3 players and 4 players, but it's really hard to make a really well balanced game for 2 players.
Right, so let's get into the details. Birthright is a 2-player expandable card game that focuses on deck specialization and customization. Now, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, why make a 2-player game? And my response is usually, I want to make a great 2-player game. I don't want to make a game that is okay at various playing counts, because it's difficult, especially when balancing is involved, when you have asymmetric variable player powers. Inevitably, some are going to do better at other player counts, and it will create a little bit of a sour experience. If you're a 2-player gamer and you're using something that isn't as good as 2-player that you like, you're going to do a worse job. By locking down the player count, by focusing on as few variables as you can create a balanced experience that will give you a fresh experience every time, but consistent results. And that's one of the things that I'm so excited about that this project has revealed.
Right, which I think is actually excellent in this time of crisis because who has a chance to meet up with 4 or 5 of their friends right now? You know, most of the time we're stuck with hopefully one other person that we can socialize with, and this is the perfect game to pass the time with.
I want to be clear that we knew that we were going to be testing in April after March Smashes was over. We did not know about, nor did we cause the pandemic. And I wouldn't actually recommend playtesting during a pandemic because it's difficult. You know, life changes, but we had these plans for a while. This has been in flight for a very long time. Like I said, it's been in development for over 3 years. I'm starting to lose track of time, but hopefully it shows in not only the passion, but the quality of the type of game that we're going to be bringing to you.
And speaking of having to adapt to the pandemic, we've adapted the game in the sense that we have digital mediums, at least to demo the game, and we'll get into that later on.
Yes.
But first of all, let's address the elephant in the room. Look, Jim is a master of Smash Up. I challenge anybody to beat him, and that is a challenge that you can pick up on later. So this is not Smash Up. We did mention 2 decks being combined. We mentioned how that, you know, obviously faction-centric. We're both Smash Up people. We played in March Smashness, but this is not Smash Up. And
to be honest,
yeah.
and I'm going to let out a really probably unpopular opinion on this channel, I don't like Smash Up. But Birthright takes all the things that I don't like about Smash Up, throws them out, and really just focuses on the things that are absolutely solid about the game, and then adds a new twist of its own as well.
Right, and so it's important that, you know, we want to acknowledge the inspiration because it's there, but there are many things that inspired Birthright. I wanted things that will be familiar to people, but I draw inspiration from a lot of places, and, you know, in the industry, one of the things that you want to do is you want to innovate, and you want to improve, and you want to give back, and, you know, this is a fundamentally different game. It's not meant to be a replacement. I think that anytime you try and replace something, it usually ends up bad, and it's, you know, you want to form your own identity, so you can take that deck construction, deck specialization feeling, but use it in a new way, even if it still is that head-to-head competing for contested resources like a base or a battlefield. As long as you innovate, and if you build upon that and go in a new direction, you can create something really interesting. And one of the things with Birthright was, how do we move away from this identity, create something that's a fundamentally different experience? It will draw you in because it seems familiar, but at a certain point, you'll forget that this was ever inspired because it feels like its own natural identity.
Yes, and so one of the things I really noticed was because this game has such solid mechanics, because the themes draw and help you understand the mechanics better. As you guys probably saw in the first couple March Smashness tournaments, I'm not probably the best Smash Up player out of our group that played in that tournament. I did beat Jim in 1 game, and that is actually probably the only game of Smash Up I've beaten Jim at.
That we remember, at least.
That we remember, right.
There's been a lot of games.
There was. Well, at least I can probably say my only 2-player game of Smash Up that I've beaten Jim at. Conversely, in Birthright, I've done remarkably better at beating Jim.
And before we continue, I just want to clarify that this is not meant to knock. We're only addressing this because this has historically been a Smash Up channel. We've tried to move into the direction of game systems. We've done things with, you know, RPGs and Sentinels of the Multiverse, War Chest, and varying other things at times. But, you know, obviously, you don't do 300 videos of a game that you think is okay. It's my favorite game that is not designed by me.
It's a fair distinction.
But I'm saying that, you know, if I'm really being honest, I am obsessed with this game, which, again, hopefully will show through and will lead to good quality. But what we're trying to do is establish that, you know, we've cultivated our own identity here.
So let's kind of really get into the nitty-gritty bit of it. Let's talk about the factions or classes. So some of the names of things may change.
Probably will.
They will change.
Yes, they will change. I didn't want to set the standard of this is what we're calling it right now. Classes, factions.
We have a development language that we use just because it's easier to explain things on terms that people are familiar with. So, and not everybody knows what the language is changing to yet, other than me. So we're going to make numerous mistakes. So we're just going to call them factions, even though they're classes.
Yep. So with these clashons, you're going to have 2 decks that you add in. But instead of each deck being of equal value, as in the weight of their cards, you're going to have a primary faction and a secondary faction.
Yes, and this is a direct callback to the game's biggest thematic inspiration, something that I have loved my entire life, and that is Final Fantasy. I could not be more excited about the fact that I get to take something that has inspired, millions and millions of people, and to use some of those core concepts in a way that will, breathe life into the board game industry. I would say that if you're familiar with Final Fantasy V or Final Fantasy Tactics, you will definitely see the similarities there in the idea that there is a primary and a secondary faction. It is not the same as playing zombie robots, where if you're robot zombies and zombie robots, it doesn't matter. To say that you're playing as fighter thieves, that is drastically different from playing thief fighters. What it does is it doubles your replayability right out of the gate, which is fantastic.
Yeah, so it expands the amount of possibilities of play. It can actually lead to a little bit of how the campaign runs in the game. I don't know how far we want to talk about the campaign of it.
I think we'll save that for another time, but that's something that we're excited about.
We're going to tease the whole campaign of these, because primaries become secondaries, become primaries, become secondaries is a whole mechanic. If you're going to run a private 1v1 tournament of seeing who actually wins the birthright of the kingdom.
Right. We'll describe it as a take-home March Smashness.
I like it. All right. So let's actually talk about maneuvers. So probably if you're familiar with Smash Up, you can play I was going to call it a unit, but they're not. They're called minions. Minions and an action. And Birthright, it's not. You get 3 maneuvers. And with those 3 maneuvers, you can do 4, there's 4 things you could do with those. And then within those 4 maneuvers, there are subsets in there. So while at the end of your turn, you only draw 2 cards, you get to play 3 or more cards on your turn, depending on what other cards allow you to do.
True, but some of those subset of actions are not card driven, they're not card related.
Right.
So there are things that allow you to add tokens to your units or to what we're currently calling battlefields, locations on the map that you're contesting. There are ways to draw other cards as those things. There's so many different little things that you can do that aren't just playing cards to enhance your position in the game. That saying that this is just a card playing game is a disservice to the game.
Absolutely. And so one thing I've always focused on during my playtesting, because we've all playtested the game, is efficiency in play. And sometimes that means not playing a card. It means using a maneuver to get you that 1 extra point or reduce the break point of the base by 1 to maximize the cards that you have in play and to save your cards for a play later on. It really hurts and sucks when you have to play a card for just 1 power, as I look at Jim from our game the other day.
1 power short from doing something amazing.
Always 1 power short from doing something amazing.
And in fact, I remember I was playing one game against my brother, and usually in Smash Up, it's hard to break a base without the other person being on it, right? I think every base except for the very last one that we broke, we each broke independently from each other. We were either pushing each other off or we were destroying card units, which can have devastating effects later on in the game, which we're going to get to in a minute with morale. But yeah, I classify it as efficiency of play, and that is what every good commander should do, is be very efficient with the resources they have at hand.
So from a board game standpoint, it uses an action point allowance system. Like Eric talked about, you get 3 maneuvers per turn, and you can choose between the 4. Unlike other action point allowance games like Pandemic, you can't double up on them. Like you can't move, then retreat like you could in Pandemic. You're choosing 3 of the 4 with no duplicates unless specified otherwise. But of course, it's coming later. And the reason for this is actually very critical. In most games, you can do certain things, and if you don't do them, those options are wasted. They're like seconds in the day. Whatever you don't use is wasted. I don't like that at all in games because I want to be able to do something. If I draw 2 and do nothing, that to me is a waste of a turn. It's basically saying that I had no good moves, and it's like I don't even bother being there. But in Birthright, because it's an action point allowance system, there is always something you can do. It may not be the best thing, but it is an option. Sometimes it is the best thing, whether it's using cards or using some of the more strategic maneuvers. Only rarely have I ever had a turn where I actually couldn't do all 3. I could definitely always do 2 of them, but that third one, depending on the game circumstance, you may not be able to do that. What it means is that, you always have something meaningful to do. You can always advance your own cause. You can use them whether to help yourself or to hurt other people. You might be able to go for a solo play because you can actually damage someone directly. And one of the major differences that you'll see is that damage is actually iterative, not so much a one-shot kill.
Mm-hmm. I would have to add that of all the games that I've played so far, I think there's only been one where there's been a turn where I can't use all 3 actions. There is no real need to have a pass action. It's very fluid, it's very efficient, and there's always something to do.
Yeah. Sometimes that is, interesting enough, a deplete maneuver to pull a card and replenish and prepare for our next phase. Well, we'll get into deplete stuff later on.
Right. So at a high level, the 4 maneuvers are going to be one that will let you play a unit or do things that will also help your cause on a battlefield. It might mean inflicting damage on someone. Like I said, damage is iterative. That way you can weaken someone over time. You can, ping them here, ping them there, then go for a final strike to kick them off a base as it's scoring. If you have a very good engine minion that you need taken care of, you can progressively attack them. You can also if you can't add power to a battlefield, you might choose to actually lower someone's power by placing a weakness token, which is basically -1 permanent power. It's an option that not everybody uses all the time, but when you use it and you use it well, it's incredibly potent. And the point is that if I have nothing to play, I can still use that maneuver in order to do something that helps me. I can play an action or do defensive things, whether it's incrementally adding my own power or adding a defensive power to block damage. Adding power is good, but you have to watch out for power creep. You're always 1 power short. If I add that 1 power for
always
you,
1 power short.
I'm doing you a big favor. So you have to be very careful. Sometimes it's better to play defensive. Sometimes it's better to play offensive. You can play an item, and items have very powerful effects, but there are less of them, so they're not necessarily likely to be played. You can also use that slot to deal damage or to basically be defensive as well. And the final thing is the deplete maneuver, which uses something that we call the morale system. There are very good effects drawing cards. Sometimes there's a complaint that a faction may not have any card draw. Well, built into the game is the ability of everyone to draw cards at a rate that you're comfortable with, but you can't do it all the time because it's going to cost you something. You can spend a little bit for blank cards, or you can get cards of your choice for something that you really can't do that much. It's another system that you have to manage, but it also gets used in very interesting ways.
There's games where I've lost the game because I did not have morale to get a card that I needed. And in turn, there are some games where I have not touched my morale at all. It's such a swing sometimes.
Right.
It's crazy how that works.
And I think different factions, really, the way they manipulate with the morale system, tend to make that swing all that more touch and go.
Yep.
There are some factions that rely on it because it's meant to be a resource. It's very limited. It's very hard to go back up. It's use it or lose it. If you lose it, which you can lose it, because there are things that will require it. there are certain cards that will require an interaction, whether it's something that you have to do in order to use a good ability, or a punishment that you get for doing something that you should not be doing, or you could actually take it away. One of the things that I've always found interesting is that I think destruction is overrated, because the goal of these types of contested resource games is to actually advance and break these contested resources or these bases. Well, if I destroy you, that's not necessarily directly helping me, because you still have a chance to respond. If I advance my own cause and I actually, capture the base or the battlefield, that's points that I get. It's locked in. Anything, even if I destroy you, you can counter with something stronger, and I got nothing for actually destroying you other than actually making you waste a card. But in Birthright, there actually are permanent consequences to losing some of your units through destruction and defeating.
All right. So, next thing we want to talk about is we went in depth and we had you guys interviewed some of our playtesters that are remote that we were able to employ in this endeavor. Who do we have first?
So first we're going to be hearing from Stephen McArg, who will be talking about royal items, which are another way of customizing the game, something that that factions have equal access to, and something we're really excited about. And then we'll be hearing from Major Beavis, who will be talking more about the deck construction aspect and what it means to actually put together your primary and your secondary faction.
All right, so let's go ahead and play those videos.
But now I want to take some in-depth looks at the game, but not from our perspective, the perspective of some of our playtesters. So we have two people here to talk to you about Birthright, and we're going to be starting with Stephen McArg. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you guys, and thank you for having me on the show.
Of course. So first, let's start by introducing. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, my name's Stephen McArg. I've been a fan of Crank It Up since it started. Smash Up's my favorite game, and Jim, when you contacted me it was around January, saying you had some big upcoming things coming, you had a game planned, and it was kind of inspired by Smash Up, but more with the strategic aspect of it. I was really intrigued, and I'd never play tested in games, but you asked if you wanted me to play test, and I jumped right on. So, yeah.
Well, it's been great to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
So, what is your current favorite faction in Birthright?
My current favorite faction is the Thieves. And there's two kind of aspects of the Thieves that I like the best. Is they have this mechanic called cloaking, where you actually will flip the card over and it will help avoid power creep completely, because it's as if the card is not in play until you uncloak it. So the Thieves are kind of a sneak attack faction where you don't give the power to your opponent until you need it and you reveal it. The other aspect is one of my favorites, is the items, when you can steal. Thieves steal from the opponents, and it can be from their hand, from their discard pile, and it's just something, I know it's a little backstabbing, but it's just a fun aspect to use their items against you in the game.
Yeah, I definitely love the Thieves as well. So, tell us a little bit about royal items. That's something that you told me was one of your favorite aspects about Birthright.
Yes, it is. My favorite aspect is royal items. What they basically are, and I'm sure, I don't know if you've described how the deck's built together, but the primary and secondary factions are put together in the deck. And then the very last 5 cards, right now we have 12 royal items to choose from. So each player has 12 royal items to choose to put 5 in their deck. And this is my favorite aspect, because it helps with the replayability of the game. You're able to see the strengths or what people like or dislike. So you can do different strategies. You can play defensively and try to kind of counter your opponent, or you can go offensively and kind of help add to what you already have on your current faction can do. Or you can add something like movement, where your factions, if they don't have it, you can add that into it. And what I love about it is it's drafted in secret. So when you draft it, your opponent doesn't know what you're doing. And so during the game, they always have to guess, well, did you draft this? You have to always be on alert. Now, there's different aspects where you'll get to see other players' cards, like with the scouts and different things. but usually you're in the dark until they play it. And one of my favorite ones is, again, it's the name is Elven Tonic. It's in ambush, so before a battlefield is scoring, you can play it and add 2 temporary power to one of your units. And I know it's sometimes where you're just losing by 1 point. That +2 will get you over and get first place, or it makes your opponent have to waste and use some of their cards. Another one of my favorite, it's called Blade of the Chosen, and that is a card where it can only be played on your leader, so it's the strongest unit in your deck. You have 1, but if you can get your leader and the Blade of Chosen together at the same time, it gives you +5 power plus your leader, that's usually 5 power in most factions, and so you can do a power throw of 10 power right away. But it does take some setting up. You have to make sure you draw both of those cards, but it's very cool and pays off. And then one other one, like I said, about movements, Boots of Swiftness, where you can attach it to a unit and it can move to, it's a command, so each turn you can use it to move to another battlefield. That's so, I just love it for even if you have like the cavalry that has movement, it helps them even more, but it especially helps the ones that need a little movement, and you can surprise your opponent when you know their factions don't have any movement and you throw it in. So those are some of my favorite aspects. And then the last thing that's really awesome with this is, like I said, you got a number of items in there and you draft 5, but it's always a struggle to pick the 5 because they're all pretty even, and it's just every time it seems like I draft different ones to try different styles or what I'm picking, so it just makes the game different every time. So it's my favorite feature is the royal items.
It's interesting because he says that they are drafted in secret, and yet I feel like that's theoretically true.
Theoretically, I mean, they're done at the startup of the game, so each player has their own set of 12 royal items. So you do have the ability to both have a Blade of the Chosen or both have the Elven Tonic, Boots of Swiftness, things as far as that goes. It's entirely possible that both players can draft the same 5, which is fantastic in terms of the balance for how you want your faction to play. So yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
But I also think it's hysterical that even though it's secret, we're definitely seeing player personalities shine through in what they draft.
Oh, without question.
Yeah, and that's actually one of my favorite aspects. I don't know, Steven, if you've encountered that at all.
Oh yeah, no, because I've played with this play testing. It's been nice because we doing it through tabletop simulators, so I'm able to play a lot of you guys across the country. So each different opponent I play, you can tell their personality shines through with what they do. And now they'll sometimes throw off, but Jim, I know you like to kind of play more offensively or counter, and then you. Some other players I've noticed, they like the Blade of Chosen because they're taking a chance. They might not ever pay off, but it's just when you can pull it off, it's great. So yeah, you definitely see their play styles. You see defensive and offensive, or a little mixture of both, but it kind of shines through. I know you have the stats on different what people draft, and it's overall some people like certain items, but overall we've seen like a 50% draft rate around close to it for all of those things.
Right, and that's really interesting because if you were to go by the numbers, you would look at certain people and you'd think they draft something 100% of the time. They're going to choose that every game. That would lead to some high draft numbers. But the really interesting thing is that no one can agree on what is the auto draft. There's like 7 things that have draft rates that are crazy high.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, me personally, I tend to find I value consistency of the fluidity of the deck and defense more so than things like Blade of the Chosen. I'm more concerned that I'm not going to get that plus 10 power by having both my leader and the blade in my hand at the same time. So while it can be a really high draft choice on auto draft for a lot of people, it doesn't meet my play style.
Right, and that's what I think is so interesting is that it supports multiple play styles where you can draft based on accentuating the current faction. You can draft based on what your personal preference is. You can draft against what someone else might be needing. And I know, Steven, you were a big part of wanting to see those statistics as well.
Yeah, so drafting against your opponent, specifically, there's a couple items that I like to do depending on the faction, but Antidote is very handy when you're playing the correct faction, so a good defensive one for that. What Antidote does is you can discard up to 2 attachments, so that could be on the unit or the battlefield. So a big one, Cavalry is a big one that has many attachments on their units and battlefields, so you usually always want to draft that when you're playing against them, just because of the strength of it, and you can discard. There's a lot of choices usually come out if you have that, so that's a big counter that definitely you want to counter. The other one would be where you can actually hurt the opponent and do damage, so it would be targeted damage plus another one damage on that. So that's another one kind of to play offensive against, to defend against your opponent, take them out.
It's interesting that you bring up Antidote, because Antidote was actually the inspiration behind Royal Items, and it goes all the way back to Disenchant. If you're familiar with Smash Up, you'll know about Disenchant. It's a trickster action that will basically do what Antidote does, destroying an action, but it's a dead card in so many factions if you don't have it. If you have nothing to use it on, it's just taking up space in your deck. And I don't want dead cards in the deck. I want every card to be useful, regardless of situation. Antidote is the perfect thing that you either need it or you don't. And if you're willing to spend one of your 5 Royal Item slots on it, then you can go ahead and take it.
And I find with certain factions, it's almost imperative to take. To not take it is almost shooting yourself in the foot.
I remember playing Cavalry. I was playing against you. You were Cavalry, and I forgot to take Antidote, and it didn't really go well.
No, that was a game changer. I believe that was one of the few blowouts that I've seen so far, and just not being able to counter what's on the table by having that card changed the flow of the game completely.
But it was 100% my fault as the player, because I made the choice, I forgot to choose to take Antidote, and so I can't really complain. Because, you could say that there's no counter for them. It's like there is. I just, for whatever reason, did not take it. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of the game.
The other one I wanted to say was the Mist Robe, where I like that because I know I've mentioned in Smash Up where your leader has the highest power, but you're always adding 5 power, so it's easier for your opponent to break. And I really like the aspect. You can play it on your Acolyte as well, but you can play it on one of your engine minions pretty much, or units, and that allows you to cloak it at the end of your turn, or it's a command, so you get to cloak it when you want on your turn. But on your opponent's turn, it doesn't add any power creep. But at daybreak, when it comes back to the start of your turn, you can immediately uncloak him and use him as an engine or as a big drop or whatever you want. But it's great because it automatically, even if they discard the Mist Robe somehow or take it from you, you're going to uncloak at daybreak, and your opponent doesn't get to use any power unless they counter with targeted damage or something else that can uncloak. But it's most of the time you're protected on your opponent's turn, which is very nice. I like that feature.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining with us today. We really appreciate everything that you've done with the playtest, and we look forward to having you on the show again.
Thank you again for having me. It's great. I'm glad to be a part of it, and it's been so exciting to finally reveal your game, Jim.
And now we have a chance to talk to one of our other playtesters, Major Beavis, who's been a big part of the playtest as well. Major, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate being a part of the team. What is up, minions? Like Jim said, my name is Major Beavis, a resident of Michigan, up in the north. I love board games. Actually took a board game design class in college. So then when Jim reached out to me to be a part of this playtesting team, I was so excited to be a part of Birthright. Now, there are a lot of things I like about Birthright. I'm supposed to actually say my favorite faction first. It was a toss-up because there are so many good factions in the core set of Birthright, but I would have to go with the Thieves. The cloaking, uncloaking, they have movement, they have damage, they're just a full utility set along with stealing other items from your rival. They are a puzzle in themselves, and if you can solve that puzzle in the game, they have huge payoffs for it. So thieves are my number one in the core set of Birthright. And so what I'm going to be talking about right now is what makes up your 50 card deck in Birthright. Now, you have to choose two factions. One will be your primary class, and one will be your secondary class. And in the core set, there are 8 core factions and 4 booster factions. And I'm going to get to what that actually means in a little bit. So you take your primary class, you take your secondary class, and then you will take royal items that will be discussed or have been discussed. And you put them all together to make your 50 cards. Now, with your primary, this is not a 50-50 split. Your primary faction choice is going to be making up 30 cards in your deck. Now, and your secondary faction that you choose is going to be 15 cards in your deck. Now, your primary set is going to be based with 15 units. 1 power 5, 2 power 4s, 3 power 3s, 4 power 2s, and then 5 unique acolytes to every single faction with their own unique ability. And your secondary is going to have 5 units that are coming from their faction, and those are actually the 5 acolytes that make up that faction are carried over to help your primary faction. Now, the next set of cards in your primary faction can be either actions or items that you'll be using during your battle to fight against your rival. But in the secondary, you have only 5 action or items that come over from the primary set, but they also bring 5 unique items that are unique to the secondary set only. And so, for example, if you're playing as Knight Thieves, your deck looks different if you're playing with Knights as your primary and Thieves as your secondary, as if you played as your Thieves with the primary and Knights with your secondary. And so that creates a unique replayability that you don't see in a lot of other games. And that's why I love Birthright, the simple fact that the replayability is huge in this game. And then on top of that, by drafting 5 royal items from a set, your deck, no matter what, can look different every single time. And with the booster factions in the primary set, in the core set, those cannot be played as primary factions. They can only be played as secondary. So sadly, you can never play as dragon skeletons. That just doesn't work out. But you can play as Thief Dragons, which I highly recommend, or Knight Skeletons, which I highly recommend as well. Both are fantastic combinations. And so that is what makes up your deck that you are going to be using to battle your rival and fight for glory.
And what is it like when you see that is actually imbalanced in favor of the primary faction? 60% of the deck is actually coming from your primary and only 30% is coming from your secondary. What does that do to your strategy?
You actually have to, for me personally, you have to think about it a lot more because you have to play to the strengths of your primary faction. And so not every secondary faction, they can't pull equal weight. Your primary faction has to do most of the work. So when you're looking to set up your strategy, you're looking for a secondary faction that plays well into that. Me personally, I look for 1 or 2 acolytes that work well with the primary, and then also look at the items from the secondary. Most secondaries, not all, but most secondaries, the 5 items that come, there's 3 of a kind, then there's 2 unique ones. And most of the time I look at the 3 of a kind to see if that helps the primary faction the most. And so, like you said, it's not an even split. And so it's very important to figure out those 3, 4, 5 cards that work really well with the primary faction, and the rest of the secondary faction kind of just helps support along the way with their unique playstyle.
And one of the added bonuses of doing this that maybe people won't realize is that you get your balance from your primary faction. In Smash Up, when it's truly 50-50, you could have your second faction be artificially influencing the weight. I have played games where one faction does all the heavy lifting and the other one is just there along for the ride, but they both share the win. When it's 60-30, that can't happen. It's really hard for the secondary faction to carry the team unless you got like a crazy deck sorting.
And that's pretty much one of the biggest things about Birthright that I really love as opposed to Smash Up, is because when you go into it, you understand what the strategies, the mechanics, just the overall play style of what you're getting into based on the primary faction, because that's where most of your cards are going to come from. You don't have some weird mishmash and amalgamation of varying strategies, things. So you can be very focused, very methodical, and you can do most of the time exactly what you're trying to do.
Right, and it kind of forces you to say that your primary faction has to be able to take care of its own, and the secondary faction also has to be able to take care of its own. We focus a lot on internal synergy. That way the primary cards are definitely, one, not conflicting with each other, but two, finding unique ways to emphasize their own strengths.
And the nice thing right now about the booster factions is they work very well with all the primary core factions. They're really synergistic with everything going on, and they provide a lot of versatility in and of themselves, where they could be played theoretically as a primary faction. I've had a few games where the booster secondary did pull a lot of the weight, but it still did it in the same way that the primary was trying to do it in the first place.
Right, and that's by design, because one of the advantages of the booster faction is that you can use an idea like card draw that would get stale if you used it too much. There's only so many ways that you can draw cards, like draw a card if you do this, draw a card if you do that. Well, what are you going to do with them? Well, if you drill down and you use that as a subset, you not only don't waste the mechanic there, you leave some space in it for future factions to use it as well, but you also allow it to be something that you can add on. If a faction needs card draw, then you can take a card draw booster and it just fits seamlessly. Major, I don't know if you've had that experience at all.
Yeah, I definitely have had that before. We even talked about when we were talking about one of the boosters that we worked together as a team to design. A lot of the ideas that we had were like, these are great ideas, but if this was a full primary set, it would be way too much. Talking about the fairies, which, have a lot of give and take, and, the idea of having your opponent choose options for you. I feel like with those boosters, none of them, you don't base your whole battle plan around them, but they emphasize so many good parts of your primary faction. And, I think about the dragons that are really good with card draw and with items as well. I think about the skeletons that help your unit recursion. They're just really good supporting, but they also bring, you can play, if your whole hand, your starting hand is your booster faction, you're not in trouble. You can still play, they can still hold their weight until you get stuff from your primary faction from the core set. And so there have been a couple games where I feel like even those boosters those booster factions have played a bigger role than what most secondary factions do in the game.
And we'll be talking about this later on in the video, but you mentioned it, so let's talk briefly about the fairies. You are one of the people who will be credited with developing the fairies. I think that they're absolutely a ton of fun. When we talk about community content, we'll talk about what it means to have, other people participating in the faction design process. But I want to get your input. What was it like actually contributing to the design of a faction that will be printed in the game?
For me, it was a dream come true. Like I said, I took a board game design class in college, and to work alongside of you and some other people on the team to just sit there and just brainstorm. For I think it was like hour and a half, and then a week later to be actually able to play the cards that we came up with. It was really cool to be a part of. And that's one thing I can't say enough about this team is working together. I have learned so much about game design, playing games, and it's just been really cool to be a part of this community. And I take pride in the fact that I get my name on the box or in the rule book or somewhere. And I always tell my friends, like, hey, I'm working on a game. They're like, oh, what's it about? I'm like, I can't tell you. You just gotta wait. So it's something that, like, as a gamer, I'm thrilled to be a part of. And like you said, with the fairies, they have turned out way better than what we originally had. Like if you sat in during that initial brainstorm session that we had with the four of us, and you saw what the fairies were then and then where they are now, just how they have improved leaps and bounds off these original ideas that we had. It was fantastic to be a part of and to just kind of see, like you said, you came up with a lot of these designs, Jim. You've been working on this for years, but then to be able to be a part from the beginning on one faction, to be a part of that design, to see how your mind works, how my mind works, how our teammates, how their minds work. It was just really cool to be able to be a part of that collaborative experience.
Well, Major, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for everything you've done with the playtest, and we look forward to having you on the show again.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me be a part of it. And make sure you guys stay tuned and keep watching this video. It's just great content is going to be coming your way, and I'm so happy to be a part of it.
All right, so thank you for those wonderful interviews. We want to talk a little bit more, now that we touched on some of those, about battlefields and in turn their objectives that they may have.
Right. So if you're familiar with Smash Up, you know about the idea of a base. It has a breakpoint. When the breakpoint is met or exceeded, it's going to capture. Maybe there's some last minute manipulation. But for the most part, if you're winning the battlefield at the start, you're going to get it. Well, there's only so much you can do with that. And it can mean that, there could be a runaway leader problem potentially, because if you have power on a base, then, it's always about power, and it sort of makes everything one-dimensional in that, at the end of the day, power is the only thing that matters. In order to make the game more strategic, we actually added on another layer called objectives, which are alternate ways of capturing a battlefield that may not be directly tied to power. It's more directly tied to circumstance. This is a way to surprise your opponents, a way to actually score twice in one turn, which provides a catch-up mechanic. In many games, sometimes when you're out of it, you're out of it. In Birthright, I like to say that no lead is ever safe. I have been able to claw back from 5-point losses or 7-point losses. Mm-hmm. I have been in 7-point losses where I did not claw back, but I got really close. The point is that anything can happen because there are multiple ways to actually attack the base. And if you're smart about it, it can lead to the efficiency that you were talking about earlier, and it can surprise people. And what you'll find is that there are battlefields that are very standard, just have the most power, meet the breakpoint. There are other battlefields that can break in heavily specialized ways that are according to their terrain type. And the deck is constructed in a way so that you have a fairly recognizable chance of knowing what you might see, even though we can swap out the bases at a later time. So for example, you might have a battlefield that will break after a certain number of turns. 7, 8 turns, regardless of what happens, that battlefield is scoring. It may kill everybody before it scores, but that battlefield will leave the playing field.
And the number of times that has bit me because I wasn't watching the turn counter on that.
It's something that you have to think about. And some people might think that, okay, if it's whoever's turn it's going to break, that's going to be an advantage for that. I can tell you that is actually not true at all. It can go either way. There was a game one time where you're like, do you want a point or not? Because it's like you threw on half the power and said, if you can to beat me, you're going to have to break it normally. If you want a point, come get a point because I'm getting 3.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that's really interesting. You have a battlefield type that can break if something else breaks at the same time. It'll actually lower the breakpoint temporarily. So it will lead to chain reactions. That way, maybe you're not winning over here and you're settling for second place, but you're completely by yourself over here. And if you break this one's going to break much more efficiently and you can surprise someone. There's a tug of war bridge system where you have to be leading for consecutive turns. You can win with 1 power if you force the other person off or if they just ignore you for that time. We've had some epic battles over bridges where, it's swaying back and forth and people are vying for control and then someone says enough of this and they just break it normally. Other times it's like, you know what, just have it. I want no part of this whatsoever.
I've given up many a bridge.
That bridge is not, that's a bridge too far.
Man, your puns are always bad.
Yeah.
Some things haven't changed.
The one that surprised me the most, though, is the objective type where the number of units on a battlefield, regardless of the power there, will score the base.
Yeah.
Right.
So movement tech or factions that have more of a swarm ability where they can put multiple minions out in a turn through many different ways can really come as a surprise where you don't have to be anywhere near the breakpoint of the base. You could be near half or very, very low, and it'll still pop as a surprise. This is going to get taken right now.
And mathematically, it works out in your favor to do that because, we're very deliberate about the power levels and the unit levels that, if you achieve the objective, you are getting some form of discount. And it's meant to be a surprise that people might just forget, like, oh, I didn't think about that. How is that breaking? And when you have multiple ways of playing the game, multiple things that you consider, it's a way of getting back into the game and attacking it so that way you can say, all right, I'm going to play smart over here and I'm going to play hard over here. It's been very strategically rich for me.
And another aspect that is unique to Birthright is where the bases are located because they have what's called adjacency. So what's next to base A, there might be X and Y next to A, and then you have on the opposite side isn't adjacent. And so the adjacency helps you with how you move. Some are based, some units can just move anywhere they want. Some have limitations on adjacency. So having that strategy of, hey, I'm going to do objectives and then I'm going to cascade breaking one base onto another base has a huge impact. You're looking at this more of as a commander on the field is one thing I love about this game.
Right. And I was playing a game with Eric once, and it was an absolutely epic game. It could go on to either of us. One of the things that we consider a successful game is where the other player can win next turn. And we were absolutely neck and neck. And I was absolutely screwed by the layout. It's like I had two bases that would be fantastic, but they are across from each other diagonally.
Yeah.
And I'm over here in the bottom right-hand corner, and these two bases are terrible for my, I have adjacency movement, and they are terrible for me. And it's like, how am I going to figure out how to pull this off? I was able to figure it out, but it was just so tactically rich that I'm like, I'm screwing myself over. I love this.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the one base that's been the bane of my existence that you cannot move units to or from. And with these adjacency movements, sometimes when you're able to move your units, if that base is in play, it's essentially a roadblock. You can't go there unless you spend one of your 3 primary actions to unlock the ability to go to that base.
Right, and that's one thing we didn't mention. Sometimes you can use your maneuvers on a base to do things that are base specific, which is super cool.
And it's actually really funny because it becomes sort of a famous last words. Like, I'm going to cancel that base's ability, and people are like, okay, yeah. Something bad is going to happen.
Power play is about to happen onto that base.
Right. And so the idea behind the battlefields, as Eric mentioned with adjacency, is that your spatial positioning matters tremendously. You can't just say, I'm going to slam everything on one base. It's meant to spread out. There are 4 bases for a reason. That way you can say, all right, I know that I'm not going to be winning here, but I don't need to win here. I just need to hold some presence so I can focus out over here. And with the ability of free movement that you get, with the interactions of the actual battlefields, it really feels like you are surveying the landscape, being very deliberate about where you place it. There's a faction that cares very much about the adjacency puzzle, where you want things to be adjacent, you want things to be non-adjacent, and you have to be very deliberate about where you position things. It's actually an incredible amount of fun.
There's actually a couple factions that are working in that direction right now.
Right, but there's one particular that calls it to mind where you might see a card and it's like, what does this possibly do? And then you do it and it's like, oh yes, yes.
I know who you're talking about. Cavalier?
Yeah.
Yep. Codename Cavalier, that's what I'm going to call it.
But it's totally Cavalier, that's the name of it.
Yep. Well,
so that's
hopefully it'll stay. It's phenomenal. All right, so let's talk about some of the upcoming videos. I know we talked a lot about it, we gave a lot of hints, but this is not an actual how-to video how to play it, right? So we're gonna have several more videos coming out following this over a series of couple weeks. We're gonna be talking about how to play this game. How you're gonna see a demo of us playing this game. We're going to talk about in that demo how you can get access and which factions you're going to be able to play in that demo. We're also going to talk about the Kickstarter. And lastly, I believe, is should we talk about how you're publishing this game? Let's talk about that real quick.
Sure. So when you work on something for 3 years, you can plan for it, and we've been planning on doing a Kickstarter. We are looking at roughly a 2021 timeline. There are a lot of things that have to happen, even just from a manufacturing standpoint, but we couldn't be more excited. We're trying to get this game out. Even if we are waiting for the actual physical copy, there'll still be the ability to play it online through Tabletop Simulator, which has been absolutely great. There'll be a free demo on that. And people will be able to follow along the process. You can go to brigandgames.com. You can follow us on social media. You'll see some of the links in the description of this video to follow along on the process, see some card reveals, some teasers. There is a ton of content in this game. If we hit all of our goals and we're able to release everything in the core set, we'll be able to have 88 unique combinations. And when I say unique combinations, I mean they are absolutely unique. And that doesn't even factor in the customization of the royal items.
Yeah. Did we even talk about royal items? Or we did during the
Yes.
interviews, right? Oh my God, those are phenomenal. There's a whole series that you could do about royal items that are
Right. And it's actually a great segue into the last thing that I want to talk about, which is continuity, future-proofing, and community content. So because this game has been in development for so long, there are certain goals that you want to emphasize with this game. And one of the first things that really stood out to me was I want one rule book for the game. I don't want a rule book that grows over time. I don't want rule books that contradict each other. I want one rule book. And I think Marvel Champions does a fairly good job about this because Marvel Champions has the core set rulebook. Now they have made modifications to it. Now to some extent that's inevitable, but the point is that you look at that rulebook and it covers everything. This is a game system. It is going to grow. It is an expandable card game. So there is more content that's being planned. The difference is that I know exactly what's coming. Because it's been in development for so long, in order to future-proof the game, to avoid making mistakes, contradictions, erratas, a lot of time has been spent in actually planning out every single faction and every single card that will appear for the next 7 to 9 expansions. That's a lot of content, but what it means is that we can introduce new ideas without conflicting in the rulebook. We can allude to things in the rulebook that you may not exist yet, but when it comes into play, we could add 1 or 2 clarifying sentences and you are absolutely good to go. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that's really exciting. It's really frustrating for people because they're like, we should do, I'm like, that's coming. We should do, that's coming.
The number of times that I have had to pipe up and say, I can't troubleshoot or I can't balance or fix something that I don't know is coming out yet.
Yeah.
It's almost a daily thing.
Yeah, we all have the great ideas. He's like, I thought of that. That was a cool idea.
And so, for example, what it does is it lets you actually build something into the nature of the game instead of, hammering it in at the last minute. Cloaking is a great example because cloaking is there in the core set. There's a lot of rules for cloaking. Takes a little bit of getting used to. But it's not a one and done. It's not only something that the thieves will do. You will see cloaking again. You will see cloaking again. Cloaking is in a royal item. It can be in potentially every game. Knowing that we're doing that, we can build upon it. There are certain token types or keywords that will become very big in the future. They may be alluded to and used here or there, and you might think, why is that in the game? Because it's actually being used very heavily later on, and I don't want you to have to be like, okay, which rulebook is that in? It's all in the core rulebook. But the most important thing, and this is something that we alluded to earlier that I'm really excited to talk about, is that when you know the direction that the game is going, you can actually take some great risks with it and develop community content. There is a lot of creativity out there, which we've seen on the channel with Custom Faction Month, with passionate fans. I don't want to shy away from that. I want to embrace that. And what that means is that we want to actually have the players of the game contributing to the game in a meaningful, publishable way. We've already seen this actually. One of the 12 factions that will be coming out, the Fairies, is only partially designed by me. It is jointly designed between 4 people. They'll get credit for their ideas, and it is phenomenal. I basically made a one-word statement about what I wanted the Fairies to do, and we just brainstormed ideas. From that, we came up with a really fascinating concept that just gets me very excited. And, you know, I can't take all the credit for it, and it's by design. You know, very soon the team will be going back and working on the booster for the next expansion because we're going to be doing the same thing again. I know what the primary factions are, but the boosters aren't necessarily going to be designed by me. There is actually an entire faction planned as the 8th expansion where the community will design, and I'm just going to be the quarterback. I'm going to say, all right, you know, here are some general guidelines. What do you guys want to do? You know, if it's not in the game, if it's within the rulebook, let's do it. That would be something that is extremely unique. It is not very much done in the industry, but it's something that's very important to me because this is our game. This is something that we are making together. And I think that by involving everybody, you get to share that collective wisdom, and it's really exciting.
And I believe a cool extra thing is they're actually going to have their name on the card if they're like the primary contributor to that card.
At the very least, it'll be in the rulebook.
Yeah.
It's space is tight. We're desperately trying to get it onto the card. But one of the things you'll notice is that cards have very rich abilities. It's not meant to be like +3 power. That's boring. No, it's you know, there's a lot of nuance in the abilities, and you want really rich, expressive abilities. So we're trying for that. But the point is that you will be credited as the author, which is really exciting. Royal items, you know, we plan on doing contests to say design royal items. There'll be a new royal item existing with every set. It could be one of yours. I think that's absolutely really exciting if I were a player.
Yeah, and we're going to have phenomenal community engagement. I think that's one thing our channel has been really good at, has been engaging with the community. With March Smashness, that was a huge endeavor, and it involved so many people, and it was so cool, and you guys interacted. It was just amazing. The amount of feedback and engagement we had with you guys, it was just so cool. And like the statistics that we ran off of who thinks is going to win, all that stuff, it was just, you guys are great.
Right. The difference is there's now no middleman because, you know, if we did that for something that's not our game, imagine what we're going to do for ours. You know, when you're a publisher, there's a certain commitment you need to make to this type of game in terms of answering questions and clarifications. I have answered, you know, thousands of questions, some of them multiple times. And I did that as a volunteer. You know, imagine what I would do for something that, you know, is my life's work, essentially.
So, speaking of life's work, one last thing we're going to tease is that prior to Kickstarter, we are going to do a little fundraising called Beat the Bandit. And that doesn't sound like it sounds like. What Beat the Bandit means is we're going to play, you're going to have the opportunity to play Jim Price here, the board game bandit. I know we're all wearing the shirts. I know you can't tell us apart. Maybe if I had a black hat on.
Anyway, where is your hat?
Right? It's over here. Hold on.
It's not black.
Nope, not black, but it's mine. All right. So anyway, you're going to have an opportunity to play Jim either Birthright, maybe after you played some demos and you practice a little bit, or Smash Up. And if you think if you can beat, and the cool thing is we're going to record it, and if you give us permission, you beat the bandit, you can have it on our channel. We're going to put it on Crank It Up. Regardless, if you lose, you still want it up on Crank It Up, we'll be happy to put it up there. But definitely, we'll have your consent. So if you just want to play Jim and you don't want it on the air, that's fine. If you want to play Jim and have it on the air, even better. Yeah, anything else?
No, I want to thank everybody for their patience and for their excitement. This has been a dream come true being able to do this. We're really excited as a team, and I'm speaking behalf on Eric, on Scott, of all the playtesters who have been involved in this. There's a lot of people behind the scenes who are working very hard to bring this game to life. We're so excited to bring it to you. I think you're absolutely going to love it. It will feel familiar, but it will give you that tournament feel, that competitive edge, that step above, you know, to feel like you're really in control of your deck. And I'm just excited to be on this journey with everybody.
Yeah, I can't wait to help reveal who all had involvement with this, because we had international, right, involvement in this.
To say the team is getting big at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm like talking with people and they don't really know who I am. I'm like, hey, yeah, let's play a game, and we just play, and it's just so fun. Meeting, engaging some of the people that Jim has engaged with, but I'm engaging for the first time, and it's been a blast.
So thank you so much for watching our intro video. Definitely like and subscribe, because we're going to have plenty more content for you, including some very cool reveals. But for now, let's shut it down.